then we have our next subject, and it will be a little bit different, that as we will go away from existing and coming EU directive, and instead hear about Britta Nielsen. Britta Nielsen, a Danish social worker who have been convicted of stealing about 13 million euros from the state of Denmark. And here next to me I have Emil, who is an investigating journalist at TV2 and the author of a book about Britta Nielsen. So I'm looking forward to hear about the Britta Nielsen and your findings. So Emil, please.
Yes, hello, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm always looking forward to telling this story. And yes, I'll start to introduce myself a little bit more. I'm a journalist working for Danish national broadcaster TV2, and I wrote this book about Britta Nielsen, which was a subject that I covered while the whole case was big. And it is a case about one of the biggest con women in Danish history, at least within the authorities of Denmark. And I will, in this short time that we have, because it's a very big story, I'll try to explain why I think she did it and how it could happen at all. And let's get on with it. Just to make sure that everybody is a little bit on board about this story, because it was very big in Denmark, but this is an international crowd, so there's probably a lot of you that hasn't heard about it. Britta Nielsen was a 64 years old woman in 2008 when she was caught. She's a little bit older now, 4 years older. She stole 117 million Danish kroners, the equivalent of around 16 million euros from the Danish state, people that was destined to some of the social vulnerable groups of Denmark. And she fled to South Africa in the end of September 2017, while just before the authorities realized that she stole all that money. But when she found out that it was about to happen, I'll get into that later. She was on the run in South Africa for about a month and a half, and then she was finally caught. And that is the story in very big lines. And now we'll try to get a little more into to the details. Just a second here. There you go. Yes. That is a picture of Britta Nielsen working behind her computer screens in the National Board of Social Services. That is where she worked. She managed a fund designed to support projects for the most social vulnerable people in Denmark. It could be homeless, addicts, people with disabilities. It was called Satspuljen, and every year there was around 1 billion kroner to give to these social groups. And one of the keys for understanding how this could happen at all and how she could get away with it is to understand how a trusted person she was within the office. Even though she wasn't a manager by rank, she had a very big authority. And nobody in the office expected that she would do anything like this. And for an example, she got the Queen's Medal of Merit 1.5 years before she was caught doing this. And while she received it, her boss held a speech praising her hard work and loyalty to the office. And in the official recommendation for the medal, it was underlined that she always made sure everything was in order. But actually, she didn't really want it to receive this medal to begin with, and that was kind of her her reputation in the office. She was very humble. She didn't make a big deal about anything. She actually wrote in the invitation for this reception that was held in the when she was to receive the medal, that my expectation for this day is completely informal atmosphere, and that correlated pretty good with how she was perceived in the office. She didn't talk a lot about her private life. People didn't have any idea that she had a lot of money. Actually, she seemed like the kind of person who would not spend a lot of money. So that was one of the reasons why nobody suspected her of doing anything like this. And just a second, I'll just need to get my windows here clear. Perfect. But to understand the case of Britta Nielsen, we should get a little into her background. She had a tough childhood. You see, this is the picture of a street in Denmark with social homing projects where she grew up. She had a mother that was that had a lot of psychological problems. She was suicidal, tried to kill herself several times, according to Britta Nielsen herself. She told in the courtroom during the trial against her. Her father had blue collar work, didn't earn a lot of money. And she described her childhood as being quite tough, lacking of money, moving a lot around, and very insecure. But Britta Nielsen, together with the rest of the Danish society, had an enormous better rise of social class living. She during the early years of her life, you saw the rise of the welfare society as well as the rise of Britta Nielsen's living standards. This is a graph showing the social expenses in the Danish society, and you can see, like, from around the 50s, where Britta Nielsen, she was born in 55, up till 77, when she got a job in the National Board of Social Services. There was an extreme rise in social expenditures within the Danish state. And that was a time where the welfare state was developed, and there was a lot of welfare reforms. And all those welfare reforms, they also helped Britta Nielsen gaining life in the social middle class, which is she found a house in the suburbs of Copenhagen in a town called Hvidovre, and this is actually a place in Hvidovre which was founded by the same movement in society, which also founded the welfare state. So she pretty much moved into the physical symbol of the welfare state, and she moved in there with her husband and with her 3 kids, and everything was pretty normal. They all had a very good life, and everything seemed very what would you say? Yeah, very, very normal, very common. But actually, there was one little problem in her life, and that was that they bought a house that was a little too expensive, and they had problems paying the loan and the rents. And she she didn't see any other way than to start stealing from her work, Britta Nielsen said. And she was asked in court, why did you do it? And she explained that she came from this background herself with a lot of insecurity, and she didn't want her children to experience the same in their childhood. So that was why she started taking a little bit of money to begin with from her work, and it's not really sure when she started. She couldn't remember herself while testifying in court, but the data from the investigation gives some indication that it was at least in 93 that she started stealing from her work, but likely it was earlier than that. But doing the investigation, it wasn't possible to get data from earlier than 93. So she at least start stealing at that point. And to begin with, actually her husband found out. He checked the mailbox, and he could see that there was a letter from the bank saying that they received an amount of money. She didn't remember how much, and he didn't know where the money came from. So he confronted Britta Nielsen, and she started crying and confessed that it was money that she took from her work, and she promised her husband that she would pay them back and never do it again. But that was the first lie, because she didn't pay them back, and she kept stealing from her work in order to get money to support her family. And instead of getting letters in her own mailbox, she made a post box in the post office. So she would get mails from the bank there afterwards. And then I'll try to explain a little about how she actually took the money. And I'll get back to the house you see there in the picture in a short while. But first of all, it was extremely simple how she did it. There was no brilliant or genius thoughts in this crime, at least not to begin with. The fund that she managed with her colleagues was, as I mentioned earlier, a fund where NGOs or authorities or other departments within the state could apply for money for projects that would go to the socially vulnerable people of Denmark. And Britta Nielsen's job was to help decide which project met the standards for this funding. It could, for example, be that the politician said, yeah, but we got 50 million kroners for homeless this year, and we want them especially for young homeless. And then an NGO could say, okay, we want to apply for 2 million kroners, going to build some kind of project for young homeless people. And then Britta would look at the application and say, okay, you can get this money or you can't get this money. And what she did to make money for herself was that she just created her own fictional NGOs, and then just started sending money from this fund to her own fictional NGOs that had her own bank account number. And then she made up all kind of fictional NGO names. There were some of them was quite ironically named when we got the knowledge that we got today. One of them was called Help to Self-Help. One of the fictional NGOs that she actually created was had the address of this red house that you see, and the reason I chose this house was that it actually shows kind of how sloppy she was in her work, that there wasn't really any criminal mastermind behind it, because actually this red house belonged to her, to a man that he had to be abroad for some months doing some work, and Britta Nielsen, she rented that house just for a month or so because she needed a place to house some entrepreneurs that had to do some work on her own house. And at the same time, she had to create a new NGO for her crime, and she just chose this house and this man's name, and by that she managed to con about 2 million kroners out of the Danish state. And this way, using these kind of fictional project was the method she used the most. In all, she stole 117 millions, and I think around 90 millions was this very, very simple way to do it. And in theory, of course, her boss should approve all decisions of funding to any of these NGOs, but that was just in theory, because the system within the National Board of Services was built the way that she could easily circumvent the boss approval of these funding. And in theory, these fictional NGOs should also both send in budgets and annual accounts to be checked. But within the office that Britta Nielsen sat in, they had a system where they could choose themselves to which budgets and annual accounts, financial accounts they would check, and not surprisingly, Britta Nielsen, she always chose to control the documents from her own fictional NGOs, and of course there were no documents. She just made it look like that in the system. And then in 2005, something very central happened to this story, and to explain how it went so far with this crime. And that was there were tragedy in the family of Britta Nielsen. She had a husband, 3 children, 2 daughters, 1 son, and in 2005 the husband died suddenly after a surgery in the hospital that wasn't supposed to be very dangerous. And that was of course a very traumatic event for the family, and all of the members of the family have more or less told the same story about this very trauma that this event caused. And they didn't really know how to deal with this trauma. They didn't share their thoughts. They didn't talk about it. They just kept their grief to themselves. And Britta Nielsen told in trial that she didn't really know how to get on with this and how to bring the family forward. So instead, she called in her 3 children and asked them all to write a name of a travel destination far away from Denmark and put them in a bowl. And then they draw one of the papers. It said South Africa. And then the family took a long vacation in South Africa. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks. And And it worked. I don't know if you could see it, but in the left side of this this photo, that's Britta Nielsen as well, in one of the very few photos of her actually smiling. And so it seems like that vacation in 2006 did something good for the family, and they decided to buy a house as well in a Danish cooperation association in Africa, a piece of land where you could buy part of the association, the co-op, and then you had the right to build a house. And that's what Britta Nielsen and her family did. And this was called Dannevirke. And Dannevirke is also is very historical name in Danish. It's the name of a defense line fronting Germany. And this place, Dannevirke, was supposed to be this this community for Danish people that wanted a house in South Africa next to one of the big safari parks, the Kruger National Safari Park. And in the beginning, it worked really well, and the community worked, and people were doing stuff together. For example, they had these meals where everybody was eating together these evenings. And here you can see Britta Nielsen is the woman with the white hair, and this is her son Jimmy on her right side, or the right from us, and her daughter Samina on the right again, on the other side of the table. And in the beginning, this community worked, but soon there started being some conflicts, and it was very clear that there were some different thoughts of how to run this cooperation between all these families. And a lot of these conflicts had Britta as part of them, and I never got to talk to Britta, so I never really know how she thought about. They never told me how she thought about this whole case. But I got a hold of some of the emails within the community of Dannevirke, and in the end of this, Britta Nielsen sent an email to one of her friends that I have, and I think that shows a lot about how Britta Nielsen's think about communities and money, and also about other Danish people, the ones that the whole population that she frauded for so many money. And what she wrote was, after some of these conflicts: "We have lost the joy at Dannevirke. We love our house, but we're tired of the lack of support to keep Dannevirke going, which is necessary. People are crying over small amounts, and there is a pettiness that is so preposterous Danish that I'm about to throw up. I'm not interested in more of that. We have enough of that in Denmark already." So I think that gives a little peek view into how Britta Nielsen actually thought about some of these issues about money and community. And one of the reasons why I'm telling you about South Africa and this whole period of Britta Nielsen's life is also because this is where we really see how her crime and stealing was peaking. I don't know if this is a little small for you guys, but you see around the middle of this table in 2007, you see that the numbers of the amount that she stole from her work almost double, and it continues to grow in the upcoming years. And that is exactly when she started her South African adventure. She bought the house and built it in 2006 and 7. And then it just kept on. The the crime and the money that the amount of money that she stole just started growing from there on. And it was partly because of her own spending in South Africa, but it was also in large part because of two of her children that you saw in the pictures just before, Jimmy and her daughter Samina. Just Jimmy, he moved to South Africa as well, and he got, as well as his one sister and the other sister, luxury cars. He spent a huge amount of money for gamer equipment. One of the daughters developed, in her own words, shopaholic condition, where she used around 50,000 euros a year just for shopping, and she had a very, very expensive hobby of horse riding. I'm not sure what it's called in English, but the sport where the horses are jumping, and she actually got to live in one of the most expensive horse farms in the world within this field of horse sports. It's in Germany, called Schockemühle. And Britta bought her several horses that costed several millions of Danish kroners. And she also tried to make a business with these horses. One of her daughter Samina, and it went really bad. And Britta had to support this business for several years, just posting money in it and never making any profit. And it was basically the same story with her son, who moved to live in South Africa. It was also just trying to make businesses again and again. He tried to make to open a nightclub, a restaurant, tried to open some kind of real estate development firms, and all of them went really bad. And all the time, Britta Nielsen had to support these businesses and the lack of profit from these businesses. So that is a lot of the explanation to where all of this money went that she stole. And she had a huge personal spending as well herself. And all of that continued from 93 till 2012, and apparently nobody suspected anything, at least not that I have found in my research of this case. But in 2012, there was their first alarm that was sound, and it was from her bank that sent a letter to the Danish Police Office of Money Laundering, and said that there was this customer that had some suspicious activity, and they wrote, the customer receives large transfers both privately and to a horse company, which are subsequently withdrawn in cash. And we find it difficult to see why the customer should withdraw so much cash, and why a ministry, and by here they refer to the National Board of Social Services, should support a horse company. And you must say that they were very wide. They had reason to be suspicious because that didn't make any sense. But unfortunately, the Office of Money Laundering in Danish police was severely understaffed at this point in time. So they didn't do anything about the letter from the bank. They actually just passed it on to the tax authorities, saying that it might be some kind of tax fraud. And unfortunately, the tax authorities in this point of time also were severely understaffed. So this just ended in a big pile of cases, and nobody never did anything about it, unfortunately. Then there's a question, why wasn't she caught in her own organization? And there was, as I briefly mentioned before, a lack of internal control mechanisms. One of them was, as I mentioned, that there were no systemic control of financial accounts from the project that was funded. And it was very easy just to make sure that you could, very easy for Britta Nielsen to make sure that she could just control her own projects. And the other thing that was failing within the internal control mechanism was that she had a double function. She was both able to submit and change the bank account numbers within the system, as well as she was able to actually do bank transactions. And I've been told by several experts in this area that those two functions should never be handled by the same person. They must always be handled by two different persons. And that was basically, I mean, if you look into the investigation, there's a lot more detailed explanation on her methods, but there was basically the two lack of internal control mechanism that was there for all of the 25 years that we know that this crime was going on, and it was still present when she was caught in 2018. But there was another really big factor that made this whole thing possible, and it was that she was a very, very trusted person. She in 2018, when she received the Medal of Merit, she had worked there in the same office for 40 years. So she was also kind of a gatekeeper to all the systems within this office. Even the managers of the office depended on her sometimes to explain how things worked. So she knew pretty much what was going on all the time. And everybody came to her. And just to try to explain the level of trust that she had among her colleagues, because, oh no, just a second. There it was. Because I personally don't think that any of her colleagues ever suspected anything or was involved in this crime. And just to tell you about one example of this trust, I'll show you this picture of a hamster wheel, and I'll get back to that later, just in a while, because in the end, she couldn't just steal directly from the fund anymore. As the example I told you about earlier, she actually had to steal from projects and take money that was already earmarked other organizations. It was a bit more difficult for her. She had to take bigger risk, and she actually had to lie a lot more. But she managed to get away with it, because every time that she could hear that somebody saw something not being right around her office, she could step in and do something about it, and make sure that nobody suspected there was anything real wrong. And she could do that because she was there all the time, because she knew all the systems, until she wasn't there anymore. Because one day in the summer of 2018, she was playing with her grandson in a playground that had this kind of playground equipment called a hamster wheel, and she fell in that and she had a concussion. So she wasn't on work for a couple of months, and therefore she was not working when some of her colleagues found out that there was missing 69,047 kroners for a project for a home housing people with psychiatric problems. And normally, if she had been at work, she would probably hear that somebody talked about some missing money, and she would find a solution, take the money from somewhere else and send it back to the project. But she was not there to intervene. So instead, her colleagues tried to figure out what happened to these 69,047 kroners, and they found out that it was not paid to the bank account of the home for psychiatric people with psychiatric problems. It was actually paid to a bank account in Hvidovre, close to Britta's home that we saw a picture of earlier. So they kept on investigating. They did a scan in their system, and they saw that there was actually a lot of transitions to this bank account number. And they called the bank. They wouldn't give her British colleagues the name of her, but they told her that she was a private female person. So they have those two. They had those two informations now. Then they did a new scan to see who actually submitted the bank account number, and they figure out that that was Britta Nielsen. All of these, they got this file showing that it was Britta Nielsen. So all of her colleagues knew, or not, some of her colleagues knew that there was transferred several amounts to an account close to Britta Nielsen's home, that the account belonged to a private female person, and that it was Britta Nielsen who actually submitted the bank account details to all of these transactions. And still, like even with those details that should have every alarm go, say boom, 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 they actually called her and asked her about help for something, and said they could not understand all of this. And then she knew that something was wrong, and she had time to flee to South Africa and to what it seems like hide a lot of her money. But that is still something that we don't have clear evidence of. And she ran to South Africa, where she met with some friends, and she went out and bought a new house in South Africa. And this is a picture taken from this Britta on the left and her friend on the right, looking at houses. There was a house in a little town called Southbroom, and she told her friend that there actually were some problems back with her work in Denmark. Her friend didn't have any idea how big a case it was, but she explained that the reason she took some money from her work was that she could never say no when her children asked for a new car or a new horse. And she said, "I've created the monsters that my children have become." And that was as close as an explanation to this whole case that I ever found. And then she was caught. It looks like this. We managed to find a video from the arrest in the beginning of November in a hotel room in South Africa, Johannesburg. And I think that concludes my presentation of this case. And if there are any questions, I think we just have some minutes to take them now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Emil, for telling us about that crazy story. one thing that I noticed were that the slide you showed us, where we can see how much she have been stealing or lending each year, so that she started with smaller amounts, and then it became more and more and more. And I guess also that tells us or reminds us how it is that we people sometimes act, that it start with the moral compass to get a little bit out of course, and then if it isn't being corrected, then it becomes worse and worse, which I guess the story clearly tells us with 16 million euros.
Yeah,
Crazy.
yeah, 16 million. Yeah, and I think that's a very correct way to put this story. That she obviously found out that, or she obviously had experienced that there were no consequence in this, and then it just kept on growing.
Yeah, it is crazy, but it also makes a great bridge to the next session. So before I talk about that, then once again, thank you very much, Emil, for telling us the story and sharing it with us.
Thank you very much for letting me
And
tell the story.